the reason why Iran hasn't done that is because the United States has basically gone all in. And the United States has said, if you attack Israel like you can attack Israel, we're going to go to war with you. That is a bluff. That is a bluff. And if it's not a bluff, Joe Biden is insane. Right now, we should be doing what Palestinians are asking us to do, which is call for a ceasefire, call for an arms embargo, support the international recognition of a Palestinian state, support the sanctioning of Israel as a genocidal, settler, colonialist, apartheid state.
Mike. I don't know who you are. I don't know where you are. But you may want to start changing your ways.
All right, chat. Daniel Levy went on Democracy Now! this morning, so this is pretty base. He said, former Israeli peace negotiator Daniel Levy, U.S. is part of axis of Zionist extremism. Based. And he's right. He's right. All right, be right back, chat.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer issued a joint statement Monday endorsing the latest push by mediators in Qatar, Egypt, and the United States to broker a ceasefire agreement for Israel's war on Gaza. The three countries have urged Israel and Hamas to meet for negotiations Thursday, August 15th, in either Cairo or Doha to finalize a deal. However, Hamas has called on the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt to implement the ceasefire proposal put forward by President Joe Biden in May, instead of holding more rounds of negotiations and discussing new proposals for Gaza. The May 6th proposal was agreed to by Hamas at the time and rejected by Israel. In a statement Sunday, Hamas said, quote, the mediators should enforce this May 6 proposal on Israel instead of pursuing further rounds of negotiations or new proposals that would provide cover for the occupation's aggression and grant it more time to continue its genocide against our people, unquote. On Monday, State Department Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel was asked about the ceasefire talks.
Are the ceasefire talks that you called for August 15, are they still going to go ahead after what Hamas said last night?
So I'm aware of those comments from Hamas, and we fully expect talks to move forward, as they should. All negotiators should return to the table and bring this deal to conclusion. We believe that there has been headway made, but we need to finalize this agreement, continue to close and bridge some gaps. But we believe that an agreement is possible, and that's something that we're going to continue to work between the parties.
Meanwhile, the Israeli assault of Gaza continues, with 32 Palestinians killed in the last 24 hours, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. The spokesperson for Hamas's armed wing, the Al-Qassam Brigade, said Monday one Israeli hostage was killed and two other women captives seriously wounded in two separate incidents in Gaza. The United Nations Security Council is meeting today to discuss the war in Gaza in the wake of this weekend's devastating Israeli airstrike on a school and a mosque within it in Gaza City that killed over 100 Palestinians. Daniel Levy joins us, president of the U.S. Middle East Project, former Israeli peace negotiator under Israeli Prime Ministers Ehud Barak and Yitzhak Rabin. Daniel Levy, welcome back to Democracy Now! Okay, the Qatar, U.S., and Egypt calling for sit-down negotiations on Thursday, August 15th. Hamas saying they want to stick with Biden's proposal from May. Can you talk about how far apart these sides are and the significance of the chief Hamas negotiator, Ismail Haniyeh, having been assassinated in Tehran on the day that the new Iranian president was inaugurated? What that means for these talks?
Absolutely. Look, it's very hard to make the case, if you are an objective observer of this, that the Israeli party is interested in a ceasefire, in even getting its own hostages back, when it assassinates the political leader of the movement that it is in negotiations with, at a very high-profile, sensitive location and moment. And therefore, what you read day in, day out in much of the Israeli press, Amy, what you hear from many named and unnamed Israeli security officials, not just those of us on the outside saying, okay, let me put the jigsaw puzzle together. It's quite clear Netanyahu does not want a ceasefire deal. And therefore the question with regard to how far apart are the parties, there is a paper, there are terms, but what is the intention, the goal of the respective parties? And Hamas has been, one has to just acknowledge this, cut through all the attempts to say, well, it can only ever be Hamas that's responsible for no deal. If you cut through all of that, there has been a consistent position that a deal can be made if this is an on-ramp to a permanent ceasefire, to Israel withdrawing from Gaza, Palestinians being able to go back to the areas where they previously lived, many destroyed, most destroyed, versus a position of the Israeli leadership which says, we can have a pause, we can get some hostages back. By the way, there are very significantly less numbers of Israelis being held in Gaza still alive today than there were when these talks began. So the Israeli position is, we can do some of that, but the moment this first phase ends, we will continue with this relentless war on Gaza and all the human costs and catastrophes that have come with it. That's the Netanyahu position. So that then translates into a couple of things. One is in the negotiating positions themselves, Netanyahu will put in all kinds of additional demands, which he knows will derail the talks. And then what do the mediating parties do? And here there is, of course, this isn't a team of equals when it comes to the mediators. There is a primus inter pares. That is the United States. That is the party who, as we just heard from Professor Makdisi, without the arms being sent to Israel, this could not continue. What does the US do? Is it willing to, so to speak, lay the dead cat at the door of the party responsible, namely Prime Minister Netanyahu, or will it continue to run cover for Netanyahu? For months and months, it has been the latter. And now we see ourselves still in a regional conflagration dynamic. And I would finally just to note this. I think the talks planned for this week, there is a hope that maybe this theory that the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, is in recess. If you're going to get Israelis out, you're running out of time. There's perhaps a hope that maybe Netanyahu, despite everything, will go for a deal. But I think most of what this is about is trying to avoid the regional escalation by saying, hey, there are these talks, we can get that ceasefire. As we just heard, if you get a ceasefire in Gaza, you can de-escalate the region. So I think this is mostly an exercise in trying to create and sow some confusion and offer a ladder, perhaps, to Iran, Hezbollah, the axis of resistance, not to go there. And it's much less, sadly, about actually bringing an end to the horrific realities in Gaza. And I insist that let's just pause for a minute. What the people of Gaza are going through, the number of dead, the number of injured, the humanitarian conditions, the permanent displacement. You're sent from one place to another with no safety, this appalling word laundering of safe zones, which are no such thing, constantly attacked by Israel, schools, UN compounds. We hear from Palestinians and medical workers in Gaza that people have learned to identify what does a naval artillery sound like versus a drone versus a fighter aircraft about to drop, more often than not, American bombs on you. This is appalling, and it shouldn't. Let's be very clear. Israel being held to account for violations of international law and the insistence that Israel adhere to international law, and American or any other weapons not be used in the committing of crimes, war crimes, plausible genocide. This should not depend on ceasefire talks. This should end full stop because it is illegal.
And Daniel, Levy, I wanted to ask you about the credibility of the United States before the world community, given the fact that President Biden more than 3 months ago said the outlines of a deal had already been agreed to by the parties, and here we are, and there still is no agreement.
I find it hard to put the words credibility in the international community and United States in one sentence after all of this. And I think much of the international community, if one can use that term, does so as well. What we are seeing right now is that Washington has only one playbook, and it is a failed playbook. It is a distorted playbook. And that consists of the following. Rather than restraining, reining in, pressuring, using the massive leverage you have on Israel, so that Israel will desist from committing crimes, whether those are the mass crimes in Gaza or the extrajudicial provocative assassinations that threaten escalation. Rather than using your influence to prevent Israeli crimes, you try and use deterrence. You try and use threats to prevent Iran and others from responding to those Israeli crimes. Now, that does a few things. First of all, it means that by standing...
I mean, that's basically the essence of American foreign policy now, which is it's not based on an appeal to moral reason. It's not based on rationality or mutual interest or democracy or the international order or international rules-based order. It is a fascistic foreign policy of force and domination. Hobbesian war of all against all. And the United States saying, we're the biggest fish. You may not be fair, but what are you going to do? Stop us? And the arrogance and recklessness of that kind of foreign policy is going to come home to roost, because the United States, even though it's a wealthy country, even though it's a powerful country, even though it's in a strategically strong position, it's only 350 million people. We're not going to be able to stand up to 9 billion. It is hubristic. It is foolish. Even if you add together all of the nations that are within the ring fence of the Western world, South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, Canada, the United States, it's not enough. It's nowhere near enough to dominate the rest of the world. And the United States is playing a dangerous, dangerous game. And humanity as a whole will not advance while the United States remains the dominant power. Humanity's next step of our evolution requires supplanting the United States from the position of hegemonic domination. That is the struggle of the 21st century. That is the struggle of the advancement of humanity. Putting the United States of America in its place.
Standing with Israel as it commits these crimes, you are complicit in the criminality in Gaza and in the continuation of that by enabling it. Secondly,
it more than that.
I do think that there is something of an ideological alignment. And we just have to be clear, America is playing the role as a member of the axis of Zionist extremism. And I think the US wants Israel. Having seen the shift in the balance of power go against Israel, it wants Israel to reassert deterrence and to be able to drive escalation dominance. But then you ask the third question, and that's where I think you are going, Juan, which is to say, how does this serve America's interests? Surely there's a divergence of interest here. And I would say that there is. There is not an American interest in a regional conflagration, but because you're unwilling to restrain Israel, and all you are willing to do is to threaten the other side more, it means that you deploy more military assets. It means that you put America at the risk of being dragged into a war. That also means that your international reputation when you're running cover for an apartheid regime in violation of ICJ rulings with an ICC request for an arrest warrant against its leaders, it means that your reputation, as you suggest, is not only sullied, but it is being dragged through the mud on a daily basis. You can't claim to stand up for values for international law, to be taking a principled position in Russia, Ukraine, or anywhere else when you are in this position of support for Israeli violations. And it also brings you to a place politically where if you're a Democrat administration, why are you letting this guy make the weather? There's a piece by the former head of the MI6, I'm here in London, John Soares in the FT. And what he wrote just a few days ago was that he thinks Netanyahu wants to pull America into a regional war and wants to undermine the Kamala Harris candidacy and strengthen the prospects of Trump. And this is a trap that the Biden administration has made for itself. Let's be very clear. They are responsible for not drawing a line, for not reining Israel in, and for continuing to send the weapons. And it is not good enough. It is embarrassing and humiliating that what they occasionally do is they leak to Axios or some favored media outlet. Hey, Biden got really angry. He was really frustrated with Netanyahu on their phone call. Do me a favor. You're grown-ups. Be serious. You send the weapons. This is not America using its leverage. This is America basically lining up and trying to bring others in the region into alignment with an axis of Zionist extremism. And it will not deliver security for Israelis either, not in the short term and not in the long term.
This is Democracy Now!
And I wanted to cover this, chat. I know it's not the most popular topic to cover, you know, foreign policy. People would rather you speak about, I don't know, dumbass Elon Musk or some other bullshit. But I'd rather talk about the things that are like, you know, actually important.
DemocracyNow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Juan Gonzalez in Chicago. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
And we'll be joining you in Chicago next week from the 19th to the 23rd in your what is now hometown for our extended 2-hour daily broadcast from the Democratic National Convention, Juan. I look forward to seeing you in person.
Yes, and I look forward to seeing the Democracy Now! Crew in person after quite a bit of time away.
So everyone should tune in next week. But right now, tensions are continuing to escalate in the Middle East after the assassination of 2 senior Hezbollah and Hamas officials in Beirut and Tehran at the end of July. On Tuesday, Iran rejected a call by France, Germany, and Britain demanding it refrain from any retaliatory attacks over the assassination of Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran on July 31st, the day of the inauguration of the new Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian. He told British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in a phone conversation Monday night that Iran has the right to retaliate in order to discourage future aggression by Israel, according to Iran's official state news agency. Meanwhile, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has ordered a guided missile submarine to head to the Middle East and for a strike group of fighter jets and Navy warships to sail more quickly to the region. Tensions also remain high on the border between Lebanon and Israel, as Hezbollah has vowed to respond to the assassination of its senior military commander, Fuad Shukr, by Israel in an airstrike in Beirut at the end of July. On Friday, Israel continued its assassination campaign by killing a Hamas commander in the Lebanese city of Sidon. Israel and Hezbollah have traded strikes since the war on Gaza began in October, but Israeli strikes have hit deeper into Lebanon in recent weeks, and sonic booms from military jets rattle the capital, Beirut. Hezbollah has also intensified its attacks and broadened its list of targets to include Israeli towns it said it had not previously hit. For more, we go to Beirut, where we're joined by Karim Makdisi, a professor of international politics at the American University of Beirut and co-host of the Makdisi Street podcast. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Professor Makdisi. If you can talk about what's happening on the border and the significance of this escalation.
Yes, thanks, Amy. Well, it's a very, very tense time here in Beirut and in Lebanon more generally. Everybody's waiting for Hezbollah to respond. to the attack by the Israelis a couple of weeks ago, which assassinated, as you had mentioned, a senior Hezbollah member, but also, more importantly, that had targeted Beirut. He was in Beirut, and they took down a building in civilian, very dense civilian area, and they killed 7 civilians, including 2 children. So the response, as promised by Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah.
There you go, Gene.
They've been waiting for the past 2 weeks, and they said, and they've reiterated that the attack is coming. And so people are waiting, and people both in South Lebanon and in the suburbs of Beirut, where the attacks, took place, many of the civilians are not so much evacuating, but they're kind of moving out of those areas. They're trying to find some kind of safe areas in other parts that are not expected to be drawn into this war at this point. So people are leaving, and people are very stressed and very tense, but are expecting something that's going to come, because it's very clear, and I think most people would support this, that if there is no response from Hezbollah, then the deterrence gets lost, and that gives Netanyahu and the Israelis a kind of an excuse to keep on bombing Beirut, attacking Beirut, assassinating people with impunity and with no response at all. So this is the mood here. And as you also mentioned, this has been going on for many, many months. And the context, the immediate context anyway, is a very simple one here, which is that Hezbollah has made clear, Lebanon has made clear, as Iran has made clear, that as soon as there's a ceasefire in Gaza, all of these support fronts will stop pretty much instantly. So this is the context, and in the meantime, people are just waiting for the response.
And Professor Makdisi, is it your sense that the Israeli government, specifically Prime Minister Netanyahu, wants a war with Hezbollah?
I'm not sure he wants a war as such, but I do think he wants to not just restore deterrence, which I think they had lost over the past several months, but to try to sort of, if there is a ceasefire at some point, he wants to be on top of the situation. He wants to ensure that the Israelis have taken the initiative, that they're being proactive, and that they will come out of this feeling like they've defeated Hezbollah, as well as defeating Hamas in Gaza. So I think it's not so much, I don't think he's that suicidal to want to start a war with Lebanon. I think it's fairly clear, even by Israeli military kind of sources and others, that a full-scale attack in Lebanon might destroy large chunks of Lebanon, but a lot of Israeli cities and areas and infrastructure will also be destroyed. And their economy is already suffering a lot. They already have more than 100,000 people displaced in the northern settlements, the south of Lebanon. And so the destruction will be quite severe on the Israeli side too. And I should say, and it's interesting to kind of make the point that this is the first time in which this kind of deterrence is taking place. So that when
Twitter said a friend of his in Beirut said they were hunking down yesterday and waiting for the worst. Yeah. I mean, like, I've been pointing at this August 15th peace negotiation. I don't know if you guys saw that there was also a joint European statement from Germany, the UK, and France about the negotiation again. And I'm not trying to read too much into it, but I'm starting to believe, and maybe this is, again, wishful thinking, but this is this is what my gut is telling me. And I don't know if I want it to be true or if it's just my asshole is tingling. But my root chakra is tingling. And it's like, it feels like the Israeli intransigence is starting to reach a breaking point. You have the UK withdrawing their objections to the ICC prosecution of Netanyahu. You see them endorsing an arms embargo of Israel. That's the UK. You see even German foreign ministry made a public post condemning Israel's most recent bombing attack on a school. I don't know. I mean, I think I'm coping a little bit. I think maybe even it's a point of exhaustion. And I don't think anybody wants this war. I think the only person who really wants this war is Benjamin Netanyahu and the fascists that he's using to save himself from going to prison for being a corrupt piece of shit. Did the Iron Dome really fail the other day? I mean, there's been a drone that got through from the Houthis, and if Iran really tries to flood the zone, if Iran really makes a strategic strike on Israel, it will be devastating. If Iran really just goes buck fucking wild, it is going to kill a lot of people, mostly civilians. And at a certain point, you have to ask yourself, when is that going to happen? I think Iran understands the reason why Iran hasn't done that is because the United States has basically gone all in. And the United States has said, if you attack Israel like you can attack Israel, we're going to go to war with you. That is a bluff. That is a bluff. And if it's not a bluff, Joe Biden is insane. So the question is whether or not Iran is going to fold their cards, because to them, risking war with the United States is not worth it. But at a certain point, the political calculus necessitates Iran make a severe reaction because they'll lose credibility with their proxies and with the people that they're trying to persuade in the global south. There's no such thing as civilian Israeli. Okay, calm down. That's not the case. That's not the case. We could get into settler politics if you guys want to, but that's not the international law system. The international law system does not allow you to kill someone just because they're a settler. Being a settler is a crime. Yes, it doesn't mean you can kill those people. Just like you can't execute everybody who commits war crimes either. What does Iran lost but refusing to respond? I believe Iran will never respond in a meaningful way. And I think that there's a lot of people who, listen, I'm not telling you that the people that are resisting occupation and settlement of their land are in the wrong. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that as an American, it is very cringe to be like, there's no such thing as a civilian. Like, what are you talking about? Like, what are you talking about? Man, like, you're an American. Calm down. And like, I find it cringe when leftists say they want to support Hamas. Hamas is not left-wing. Hamas is not the only formation that is trying to liberate Palestine. So how about you throw your weight behind, PFLP or some other organization that's at least aligned with the left, not Hamas. Stop being cringe. Just because Hamas is the famous one that the media talks about and you're trying to be contrarian, do a little bit of fucking research. The PFLP is with Hamas. The PFLP is aligned with them in the resistance against Gaza, but they're not Hamas. It's sort of like, in the resistance of World War II, there was a lot of different partisan formations that resisted the Nazi occupation. In general, I support those formations, but there were far right nationalist resistors of the Nazis, and there were communist resistors and socialist resistors. I support the communist and socialist resistors. I don't support the fascist resistors, even if I agree that their cause of fighting the Nazis was just. Iran doesn't even have to strike Israel. All it has to do is put an embargo on commercial traffic in its waters. I mean, yeah. I mean, Iran is much more capable than the Houthis are.
There are people displaced from southern Lebanon. There's sort of an equal number of people are displaced from northern Israel. When the Israelis hit targets in South Lebanon, Hezbollah responds and hits targets in Israel. So they've made it very clear that, for example, if the Israelis were to hit the Beirut airport, that they would respond and hit the Tel Aviv airport. So there is this kind of deterrence that is working. It's unfortunately things are escalating on both sides. And the idea is now that the Israelis, through the assassination in Beirut and through killing civilians and destroying, civilian infrastructure in Beirut a couple of weeks ago, they've crossed the kind of red line. And so that's why Hezbollah kind of needs to respond.
And could you talk about the relationship between Hamas and Hezbollah and how it has evolved over the past 18 months?
Yeah, the relationship at this point is a fairly close one. Hezbollah made it clear that after October 7th, that they were not involved in that initial Hamas attack in Israel, but rather on October 8th, it's sort of basically, they call it here the October 8 war, began with Hezbollah trying to create a support front, as later happened in Yemen and Iraq and the Iranians. So there are support fronts that are taking place, all of which was intended to pressure the Israelis to end what came to be the genocide there and to kind of establish a ceasefire. So the position has been very clear that without a ceasefire, this support fronts will continue. And so there's a lot of coordination between Hezbollah and Hamas, and indeed the Yemenis and others, Iraqis. So there's kind of very close coordination, with Hezbollah being kind of at the front of this coordination, because they have a long history and experience with the Israelis. And so this coordination is getting closer and closer.
As fall semester nears, Columbia restricts access to campus to prevent disruptions. I'm so glad I'm learning about this in the Times of Israel.
At the military, at the
I'm
strategic,
so glad
and the military
I'm learning about New York City
so
in the Times
Hezbollah
of Israel.
will not stop until Hamas agrees to a ceasefire and says it has accepted a ceasefire. So the coordination is quite close, and I think it will continue to be close.
We're going to talk more about a ceasefire in a minute, but I wanted to ask you about the latest in Gaza. You have what happened this weekend, the Israeli strike on the school in Gaza City, within which was a mosque, which killed close to 100 people. It's not clear if there was any one body that was identifiable. So many body parts strewn all around, and the international outcry at what has taken place there. And then CNN...
I'm not being edgy or anything. Israeli citizens are heavily armed. Israel is conducting a genocide. To call these heavily armed people that do not resist their government civilians is insane. They do not stop the killing. They're complicit. They are not. That's not what civilian means. You don't know what civilian means. People not resisting their government doesn't make them not a civilian. That's not what civilian is. I'm sorry. That's not what civilian means. You're that literally the same thing could be said about you. If you're an American, you are directly supporting the Gaza genocide. Are you going and trying to attack the weapons fucking plants that are in your country? Where do you think Israel is getting their rockets and their artillery shells and their money and their planes? It all comes from America. If Israeli civilians are not civilians, then you're not a civilian either. It's the exact same logic. So you're literally just saying, I'm not a civilian because Americans are heavily armed and we're doing a genocide. It doesn't make sense. Unless you're claiming that you are guilty. And this applies for Europeans as well. You're all helping Israel. You don't think you get off, or Canadians or Australians or New Zealanders, or, you're all on the same fucking American genocidal Zionist support network. Okay. So don't think you get off easy. So like that logic is, first of all, and that's not even talking, removing that from the logic. That's not even what civilian means. Civilian doesn't mean not a settler. Civilian doesn't mean, now I think settlers, especially when we're talking about the West Bank, that's a war crime. If we're talking about people within the internationally recognized borders of Israel, even though those borders were formed by a crime, they're not technically considered legally settlers. The settlers are the people who legally live in the West Bank. That's international law. And even Palestinians and Palestinian organizations have recognized the legitimacy of the state of Israel at this point. So whether, like, you growing out there and again, as I'm saying, LARPing and trying to rewrite international law doesn't help the Palestinians. In fact, it hurts them. You're playing right into the Zionist hands because the Zionists are in violation of international law. And so asking for a neutral enforcement of international law hurts the Zionist entity. So when you try to argue that international law doesn't matter, you're helping Benny Morris, you're helping Netanyahu, you're helping Joe Biden, you're helping the Zionist entity destroy the lives of Palestinians. Get your shit together. And you're not winning over anybody because, as I said before, the logic of them not being civilians applies to you. It's wild that the 67 borders are the internationally recognized borders when they were seized by a war of aggression. Yes, it's wild that Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Nevada, Utah, and California are all part of the United States when they were seized in a war of aggression. You know what I mean? Like, at a certain point, you have, we can't carry the grievances of the past forever into the future. That's not to say that the Palestinian people are not justified completely. It's just your way of interpreting things leads to spirals that never end. Right now, we should be doing what Palestinians are asking us to do, which is call for a ceasefire, call for an arms embargo, support the international recognition of a Palestinian state, support the sanctioning of Israel as a genocidal, settler, colonialist, apartheid state. The best way to do that is not to go out there and go, oh, no Israelis are civilians. Because, by the way, what are you even trying to do? What are you even trying to do? Retroactively justify the killing of civilians as a way of what? Convincing people what? You're not acting with political intention. And that's what I want people in my streams to do. Operate with political intentionality. Have a goal and work towards the goal. What is the goal? Ceasefire, arms embargo, recognition, freedom, end of apartheid. You're distracting me with dumb points that aren't even correct.
And confirming that it was a GB-39.
And by the way, I'm not arguing in favor of the Nakba or anything else. What I'm arguing in favor of is the reality that the Palestinians first need to have a state. When they have a state, they can enforce their borders. When they can enforce their borders, they could do something like, for example, evicting illegal settlers. Would you be opposed to UN peacekeepers taking over control of Gaza and West Bank during and after the ceasefire until the end of apartheid? I don't think it's my place to say what the Palestinians should do or not do for their internal security. I think that Palestinians should have the right to self-determination, which also means developing their own foreign policy and defense policy. Similarly, I think that, I mean, when you look at Israel, if you look at the Middle East, almost every single state that is dysfunctional in the service of Israel. Lebanon, Israel. Syria, Israel. Jordan, Israel. Egypt, Israel. Those are the border countries of Israel, and they're all dysfunctional because it serves the interest of what? Israel. That is the reality that we're facing.
That was used, a U.S. bomb, GBU. And within 2 days, the U.S. approved $3.5 billion in military aid. It opened up the spigot for it. It had already been approved by Congress to Israel. The significance of what's happening now, and even as we're speaking, Professor Makdisi, the far-right National Security Minister Ben-Gvir going in with thousands of Israeli settlers to Al-Aqsa, the significance of this?
Yeah, this is hugely significant, and this is something that's been repeated, as you've been reporting for many, many months now. There is no way that what's going on in Lebanon and at the southern Lebanon front is going to be somehow separated from what's going on in Gaza. The U.S. has sent Biden's personal envoy, basically Amos Hochstein, who, by the way, is an Israeli and served in the Israeli army. He's the personal envoy of the United States to Lebanon, and they've sent him now several times to try to kind of, come up with some deal between Lebanon and the Israelis. And this has not worked. And the reason it hasn't worked is that the main goal of Hochstein, what he's tried to do, is to try to separate Lebanon and what's going on that front with what's going on in Gaza. And that way, and it's kind of clear here, that way it allows the Israelis to continue their genocide in Gaza without having to deal with the support fronts that Hezbollah are doing here and in other parts like Yemen and Iraq and other areas. So there is no way that things in this region will stop until there's a ceasefire. In a sense, it's very, very simple. The Americans need to pressure.
Keep going.
The Americans need to pressure the Israelis to reach the ceasefire. Otherwise, all of these fronts will continue. And the danger here is that without a stop, and we know that Hezbollah is going to respond, the question is who's going to stop the Israelis from an even bigger response in Lebanon?
Go read some actual material. I think the strategy that the Palestinians have laid out is one. And I think you're actually insulting even Hamas fighters by saying they don't make distinctions. I think Hamas fighters do make distinctions. I think Hamas fighters don't go and execute children intentionally. I think Hamas fighters have been very targeted largely in their operations. There have been strikes against civilians because that's the limit of their capability. If Hamas could push a button and only kill soldiers, they would do that. But they don't have the capability to militarily resist and be so precise. So I think you're just confused about the people that you're even trying to defend.
Which then will precipitate another response from
Zionists need to be removed from the region in order to free Palestine. I mean, I don't think I don't think that's actually a plausible plan. At a certain point, there is going to have to be a trusted reconciliation council where Israelis who want to live there under the system of equality, a system of equity, must be allowed to remain there at a certain point. You're not going to be able to evict them all. That would be crazy. A lot of people are multi-generations in. It's just they don't have any other home. It would be ridiculous to try to disentangle. So that is the reality is some crimes are going to need to be recognized and apologized for, but they can't be erased and they can't be completely reconstructed. It's the same thing with America and the native population. We can't wind back to 1776 or 1619.
Hezbollah, and then this is going to keep escalating, and this is something which is extremely dangerous because while it can continue to kind of escalate slowly, at some point there's going to be a threshold that's crossed, and that might lead to an all-out war. And if it does so, the entire region is going to be kind of brought into it, and this is extremely dangerous and something everybody here is feeling very closely. So the idea that everybody in Lebanon understands, and as far as Hezbollah is concerned, they say it very, very clearly. Each time Hassan Nasrallah comes on TV, he makes it clear. As far as they're concerned, it's an American war that uses the Israelis. It's not the other way around. So the U.S. is directly involved. Without U.S. weapons, without daily or weekly supply of U.S. weapons to the Israelis, they would have to stop. It's not even that they have to accept the ceasefire. They could not prosecute their war in Gaza without continuous American supply of weapons and support and diplomatic support, on top of which now, as I think you reported in the last few days, the U.S. has now sent in even more battleships, including kind of more aggressive and attacking offensive battleships into the Mediterranean and not far off the coast of Lebanon, presumably to kind of deter any kind of Hezbollah attack, or if there's an escalation, a much larger escalation. So the U.S. Defense Secretary has come out and said they will support Israel no matter what. Secretary Blinken has made it clear that they will support Israel no matter what. So there is this very clear and unfortunate kind of coming together of the United States with Israel in every action in Gaza. And I think what's interesting is that when Netanyahu went to the U.S. a couple of weeks ago, and there was this kind of, what appeared to be this very grotesque, applause within the U.S. Congress and his other meetings, it's very clear that Netanyahu came out of the U.S. either with a green light, some people say it's a green light by the Americans to kind of escalate in Lebanon and Iran, or perhaps more likely that he understood that he had no restraints. So he came, escalated in Lebanon, escalated in Gaza, escalated in Iran, and clearly relies on the U.S. to increase its deterrence, to send more weapons, to make it clear to everybody in the region that if Israel is attacked in a significant way, the U.S. will get involved. Now, it's unfortunate because there is no way that U.S. interest is for there to be a regional war. It's impossible for anybody to make that kind of argument or that case. So attaching the United States to a genocide in Israel and a kind of an extremist right-wing government in Israel that has an incentive to keep escalating, certainly in Lebanon and even in Iran. This is an old plan. Netanyahu has for many years, if not decades, been talking about, trying to stop Iranian nuclear, facilities, to try to attack Iran, to try to create a weak Iran, and certainly to try to create a very weak...
I'm not laughing at this. I'm laughing at a video. I haven't seen this motherfucker for 15 years? At the beginning of YouTube when people were debunking creationists? Oh, shit.
We compliant Lebanon by destroying Hezbollah. So all of this is going, and the question is, why is U.S. interest so attached to these aggressive Israeli policies and actions and strategies here, instead of trying to do what they can do, which is to restrain the Israelis? Because as far as everyone else in the region is concerned, get a ceasefire, everything stops. Get a ceasefire, everything stops. That's it. It is as simple as that. The only people that can lean on the Israelis are the Americans, and everybody understands that. So when people are watching social media and television and see the images in Gaza, this comes home, and it becomes more and more difficult to dissociate the United States from Israel, and that's really unfortunate.
She has no idea who Mike is.
Mike. I don't know who you are. I don't know where you are. But you may want to start changing your ways. Change your ways. Or changing your